This lecture we are looking at language. Now this quote here is a very important quote, and I think it highlights something pretty vital. The quote is, "Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with shades of deeper meaning." Maya Angelou. This is a highlight of what we're going to start talking about here. Oftentimes, verbal communication is the first thing we consider when we begin looking at communication overall. It is the most obvious, the most complex, or in our eyes, the most complex, and very diverse part of communication. I mean, honestly, consider how many factors play into the effectiveness of your verbal communication. There are many variables in verbal communication, ranging from cultural language differences, like the words you choose in the Midwest compared to the words that are chosen in the South or the North. The words you choose in the United States as compared to Australia or England. Or literally a complete difference in cultural language, meaning a English language compared to Mandarin or some other language, Spanish. In addition to cultural language differences, we have connotative and denotative meanings. Now, if you are looking at the text-based version of this lecture, you can see that these are links, and they take you to explanations and examples of both connotative and denotative meaning. In a very simple format, or very simple terms, connotative meaning is how a word feels, and denotative meaning is the literal dictionary definition of a word. So if I'm using the word work, the connotative meaning of that might be how I feel about the word work, or how I feel about work in general. And does it make me happy, or do I hate my job and I'm cranky or unhappy about it? That's the connotative meaning. It's kind of the tone of the word that you're using. Whereas the denotative meaning is its actual definition. So in the word work, it is literally to earn money by achieving tasks or providing services. In addition to that, we also have what's called polarization. Now, polarization is a very interesting theory or term. When we think of words, oftentimes we tend to think, when we're describing things, we tend to think of them in extremes. So if I say, how are you feeling today? You're going to say good or bad. And that's the initial reaction you have. We polarize our language, and it's very easy to do. It's very easy to say what is extreme. It's much more difficult to come up with the information that would fit in the middle of the extremes. So for example, if I were to say to you, please tell me the polar opposite of the word hot, you would say cold. The polar opposite of the word strong, you would say weak. But what if I asked you to come up with more descriptive middle words? If I said hot and you said in the polar term cold, what would go in between that? For you, you might be able to come up with a couple, but somebody else is going to come up with something different. The extremes are easy for us on the whole as a community to come up with and be universally agreed upon. It's the middle that's more complicated and diverse. So that polarization plays a role in verbal communication. And with all of these things to consider when communicating verbally, where do you even start? The key is to look at the various aspects of verbal communication and address any issues that you can attempt to fix right away. Now keep in mind, when we talk about verbal communication, we are talking about something that is meaningful and complicated and diverse. But as Maya Angelou stated up here, there is so much more to communication than just words written on paper or words spoken aloud. There are so many other factors. It is the way your voice infuses a word, like we mentioned with connotation. It might be your physical nonverbals, your stance, your tone, your vocal nonverbals. All of these things play a part. But we can work and start with that verbal. So we're going to look at some of these issues and see how they can be fixed. So let's follow down and look at one of the most common issues and one of the easiest to fix. In verbal communication, one of the most common issues is you language and I language, or you language being the primary issue. You language is a statement that focuses blame on another person and looks at the situation in terms of extremes, like we mentioned with your polarized language. So for example, you might say to someone, "You are so selfish." Now this type of language pushes the blame solely on the other person. This type of language often causes immediate defensiveness from the person receiving the language. If someone were to say to you, "You always do this," or "You are this way," oftentimes it causes a wall to shoot up. We become immediately defensive. So when communicating verbally with others, you want to avoid you language in all communication, in as many instances as you can come up with. So instead, you want to use what we call I language. And this type of language focuses on the sender, on you, and how you feel, as well as offering very specific details applicable to that situation. Now this is more complicated than it sounds. It's easy to fix once you have the right idea, but often people will just attach "I feel that you are so selfish." So they'll just attach "I feel" to another you language. That's not how that works. I language is more complicated than that, and you have to be very specific to that situation. So let's look at some of the things that you could do. So instead of saying, "You are so selfish," or as I mentioned previously, attaching the word "I feel" to another you statement like, "I feel you are so selfish." Instead, you might say something very specific like this: "When you don't ask me for my opinion on something that affects us both, I feel like I'm not being acknowledged." Okay, so you're not accusing them. You are stating literally how you feel and why. And that can be a universal to any situation in which you feel like somebody's being selfish. So instead of saying "you're selfish" and causing that barrier to go up and deleting any future conversation that might aid you in some way, give them the details. "Hey, when you don't ask me for my opinion on something that affects us both, I feel like I'm not being acknowledged, and I don't think that's right." Okay? So this statement addresses the specific issue and keeps the focus on you, not the person you're speaking to. Now, I language helps to clarify our meaning as well as take the whole blame off of the person you're speaking to. That doesn't mean that they were right, but it takes the language blame off of that person in order to foster communication and foster resolve. So in the end, that helps to reduce that defensiveness and encourage more communication. Now below are a few examples of you language and how they can be effectively translated into I language. So one example would be, "You don't understand a word I'm saying." Now again, you don't want to just attach "I feel" or "I think" or something like that to the front of another you statement. So you don't want to say, "Well, I think you don't get it," or "I think you don't understand." You don't want to do that. That's not I language. Instead, you want to say, "Hey, when I don't get a response to my question, I feel like I'm not being understood." So there's something like that that focuses the situation on you and your feelings and gives a very specific example. When I don't get a response to my question. So here's the situation, followed by the feeling that's attached to it. I feel like I'm not being understood. And it all focuses on I, not you. Next, "You are too nosy. Mind your own business." Instead of using that or anything similar to that, you want to say, "Hey, when you ask me questions about that, I feel uncomfortable. I would like to keep that to myself." All right, so you are telling them specific situations. And if you look at this right here, we are using the word you. So it's not like it's a taboo word where you cannot bring up the other person in the situation. You want to avoid it as much as is applicably possible. But when certain circumstances are important, like, "Hey, when you ask me questions about that or about this situation, I feel uncomfortable." When that is applicable, it is okay to use the word you. Okay? Next, "You totally humiliated me in front of our friends." Again, using you, or "I feel like you totally humiliated." Something like that is something you want to avoid. Instead say, "Hey, it really embarrassed me when that story was told about me in front of our friends." Or I was really embarrassed when you told them this. Again, using the word you, but not in an accusatory way, in a informational way. Last one, you never help me around the house. I mean, how many times have people stated this before? Instead, you say, look, I feel overwhelmed when I do laundry, dishes, and vacuuming. Do you think you could take one of these off my plate? That is asking for resolve. That is giving a specific set of details that explain what you're doing and then asking them to do something specific in return. It's not accusatory, it is resolution seeking. Okay? So this is actually, once you get the hang of this, this is very easy to do subconsciously. You don't even realize you're using this language. At first, it's going to feel a bit silly. And when you're talking to your significant other, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your spouse, or your mom or your dad, you're going to think to yourself, this sounds so corny. And it might feel that way to you because we're so used to using you language. I mean, blame is self-preservation. It allows us to feel like we are safe because we can push the blame out on other people. So this is less safe to us in our subconscious mind. So when we use this, it is going to feel unnatural at first. But I promise you, the more you use it, the more subconscious it will be, and the easier it will be to do this without even thinking, without feeling uncomfortable in any way. So try that you language sometime this week. See how it goes. Try it a bunch of times to the point, see if you can get to the point in about a week or two where you don't feel like it is so uncomfortable or unnatural. Now, judging others through the use of you language is very often used with friends and family, but what about the use of it in an even bigger scale? So not just when we're talking to our spouse or when we're talking to our friend. One language issue that we tend to experience is what we call ethnocentrism. Now, ethnocentrism is the tendency to evaluate the values, beliefs, and behaviors of your own culture. And remember, culture can be a number of things. It doesn't have to be this country versus that country. It can be men and women, age groups, religions, political fields, all of these things, job descriptions, all of those are us versus them when we think of the word ethnocentrism. So it's the tendency to evaluate the values, beliefs, and behaviors of your own culture as being more positive, logical, and natural than those of other cultures. Ethnocentrism is something that can impact our daily interactions. Honestly, it permeates many areas of our lives in some form. Now, being ethnocentric does not necessarily mean that you are outwardly hostile to others. It really does come in a variety of degrees, and that's what we're going to look at. And if you'll notice, one of the degrees is actually something to shoot for. You want to have this. So there are very, very distinct degrees that you can consider. And the best way to use this chart is to find where you are and what is the next positive step towards alleviating these strong ethnocentristic behaviors, and then taking actions to achieve that next step. So that's the best way to use this table here, rather than just memorizing the categories, the degrees. Now, if you'll notice, I have these in various warm colors here. We're starting with a bright, content, well-lit color, all the way up to a deep, heavy color. And that is how you should view these degrees. When it gets hotter, when it gets heavier, when it gets more intense, your language, your attitude, your thought processes are things that you would like to avoid, or hopefully would like to avoid. So you start up here in the ideal situation, and that is the degree of equality. And this is where you treat others as equals. So you view different customs and ways of behaving as equal to your own. That doesn't mean you feel like you could do what they do, or act the way they act, or eat what they eat. But you view their choices as equal to yours. So, for example, I am a vegetarian. My husband is not. If I did not feel a sense of equality, I might see his choice of eating meat as less than mine. I might see myself as better than him for my choice not to eat meat, that particular cultural belief. Now, inequality, and which is where I am right now with my husband, I see him as equal. his choices are completely fine. They're completely applicable, and many people feel and should take the route of eating meat. That's completely appropriate. And mine is equally appropriate and equally applicable to certain people. So I see us as equals. I don't see him as less than me for that choice. So that sense of equality is something you really want. Now, sensitivity is the next one. And it is where you want to decrease the distance between yourself and others. Now, notice that that means you see a difference between yourself and others. So you do feel a little bit of superiority, or you do value your beliefs or ideas or practices as better than, to a degree, a small degree, but it's better than another person's. However, you want to decrease those feelings. You don't want to feel that way. You want to get to equality. So this is something that, let's say, prior to where I am now with the vegetarian and meat eater situation, where I might think that my choice was more ethical or more appropriate than his, but I felt bad about it. And I thought, that's silly. I really shouldn't think that way. I know I do, but I shouldn't think that way. That's sensitivity. You don't want to feel that way, but you do. So you're looking to close that gap. You want to go to equality, but you're not quite there yet. Now, indifference is the next heavier level, and this is where you lack concern for others, and you prefer to interact in a world of those very similar to you. Now, I'm going to continue with my vegetarian example, but you can take this to a very heavy degree. You can talk about racism with this, or sexism, or anything very, very extreme. But in indifference, I really don't care about anybody different from me in this category. So if I'm a vegetarian, I do think that I'm better than the other people that eat meat. But in addition to that, in addition to the fact that I don't see myself as equal to them, I see myself as more superior or better than them, I also don't care about closing that gap. I don't need to feel or desire to feel equal or even sensitive to that person or group. So I see my vegetarianism as superior. I'm not going to go belittle meat eaters, but I don't really need to see myself as equal to them because I am superior. That would be my thought. That's not how I feel, obviously, but that would be my thought. And the next one would be avoidance. In this case, I avoid and limit communications, especially intimate ones, with interculturally different others. This is kind of hard to do with my vegetarian example because it's a little silly in that, but put it into perspective with anything more serious. So as a vegetarian, I would think, those meat eaters, please, those people are crazy, they're totally unethical, and I'm going to steer clear of them. I don't even want to be around them. That would be avoidance. Obviously, that's a bit silly for a vegetarian versus meat eater, but it does happen in other circumstances, especially other religions. So if people are, let's say, Christian or Catholic, or well, I know those are very similar, but that kind of thing, they have very strong religious beliefs. They may feel that they don't want to be around anybody that's agnostic or atheist, or vice versa. Somebody's atheist or agnostic, which just means that they don't believe in religion. It's not anything that's supposed to be hard on a religion. It's just, I don't believe would be the statement from an agnostic or an atheist. But those people, if they feel like, well, those Christians or those Catholics, I think they are not as smart or not as new age as I am, that would be that avoidance, and they want to steer clear of anybody of religious intent. That would be avoidance, and it's an ethnocentric behavior, and vice versa. And then finally, our disparagement is the extreme, where you engage in hostile behavior, you're belittling others based on their cultural beliefs and desires, and you view those different cultures and ways of behaving as fully inferior to yourself. So all those meat eaters out there are losers. That's how you think of it. It's not an appropriate way to think of people. And if you put it into the perspective of a vegetarian versus a meat eater and you think, wow, that's pretty silly. Well, put that same thought into all other aspects. Religion, politics, male and female, family choices, all of those things, you put those together in the same category as you would my argument or my example of vegetarianism versus meat eaters, And you're going to think that that sounds pretty silly. So this disparagement, you actually say things to the other group. You are less than me. You're an idiot. You're stupid. Those kinds of languages that really are degrading to a person. And that's the heaviest degree of ethnocentrism. So these are quite impactful in society and community. It can change the nature of interaction. It can hurt workplace relationships and productivity. It can harm quite a few things, so it is something to really consider carefully. What are your beliefs? What are your cultural decisions or lack of decisions? What did you grow up feeling, thinking, and doing? Be very, very clear with yourself about what you believe, what you think, and how you use those beliefs as a comparison to others. What language do you choose when talking about those that are opposites of you, that are different from you, that have those polar changes or those polar differences? Where do you fall in this degree continuum when considering someone that is very different from you? That is key. If I learned anything in my life, that is one of the things that I have found most valuable, is understanding where I lie in my cultural beliefs, practices, ideas, and values, and took those and compared how I was feeling compared to the other opposite, to the person that might be very different from me politically or religiously or lifestyle choice wise or anything like that. So it's quite an impactful way of thinking. Hopefully you will sit down and really consider your views and see how they fall into the ethnocentrism degree continuum. All right, so hopefully you got some stuff out of this week, and we will look on our next lecture at nonverbals and see where we lie in the nonverbal side of things. Have a great week.